fire up your AnyLogics, and we're going to dive into an introduction to the AnyLogic interface and some guidelines for using AnyLogic with models. Okay, I'm going to be providing here some tips, which in previous boot camps I've only provided in a very piecemeal way, but I'm going to provide them in a sort of grouped fashion in hopes that it will help you during the boot camp and subsequently navigate AnyLogic more effectively. Okay. It will work actually with either one. So I'd say for now, why don't we do it with 8.1, okay? And we can take on 8.3 subsequently. Okay. So I'd like to actually perform this sort of introduction to the AnyLogic interface just on the heels or at the same time covering some basics of creating a first model. But first I'll provide a few pointers as to the interface itself. So when you enter AnyLogic and you minimize that help screen that first appears, I noted that we saw several panels. And if we were to reopen that model from this morning, let's say we do File, Recently Opened Model, and we were to reopen that, what you'll find is that there's several windows shown to you. I refer to each of these kind of panels as a window. The one on the left I noted earlier is a model hierarchy panel. This provides understanding of the pieces of the model and provides a way of interacting with it hierarchically by expanding particular elements of it. You can expand it and you can go navigate to particular items here, for example, by double clicking, and it will show these items to you. Okay? So this is a hierarchy, meaning that you can actually go and expand it and dive down to particular pieces. And for some of the models we use, it's actually most convenient to access their pieces directly through this hierarchy. An alternative is that you can open up these broad pieces of the model, for example, these agents here or these experiments here, and by opening those up, let's say we open up main, you can see the various pieces out of which main is composed. So, for example, there's this GIS map, there's this, there are these graphs, for example, there are these what will be called parameters and populations within it, etc. Now, regardless of how you navigate to one of those, whether you select it, for example, here in main, or whether you double click on it over here, you'll notice when you select something, by double clicking here or by just clicking on it here, you'll be brought to something in what's called the properties page. The properties page, which is shown on this tab here, this little tab up top is what I'm calling a tab. Here, you'll be able to see information in the properties window about the thing that's selected. So for example, if I select this thing that says home within person, then I can see information about that. If you don't see person here, if there's no so-called canvas to show person, for example, if I wasn't showing it, all I have to do is double click over here and it will show that canvas. I could click on things, and in the properties window it will show me information about the thing on which I've clicked. And that can allow me to then change some of these assumptions. For example, I could change the initial value associated with energy intake to a different value, or change what sort of item it is. So the canvas provides us a way of browsing the model details at a sort of horizontal level. This model hierarchy over in the left allows us to browse it at a hierarchical level. Either one of them allows us to select things. By selecting them, they appear in the properties window where we can change assumptions or change information about the thing that we've selected. We can put in descriptions for the thing, provide some metadata, for example, maybe about why we added it or based on what paper a certain value was based. And we can set particular aspects, for example, values for stocks or for flows here. We could set aspect of their of the equations associated with them. I won't go into those particulars about what you set for each thing. We'll be spending much of this afternoon and elsewhere on it. A couple more things about this pane. You'll notice that there is an ignore option here. This is very fruitful to sometimes allow you to say, look, I've got something in my model. I don't want to delete it, but it's not ready for it. I just want to, for now, I want to ignore it, okay? Now, you have to use that carefully because if you ignore it, sometimes there'll be other things that depend on it that won't know what to do. But you can generally ignore certain things without problems as long as there's not something else that depends on them. Or if there are things that depend on them, you ignore a whole set of things together. And it is possible to select multiple things together. For example, I could click on this variable and then control click on this one. I've selected two items and I could ignore them both, for example. Okay. Now, you have to be cautious in ignoring. You'll notice something else. I want to show you something that's an important element in terms of using this. If I say ignore, for example, I'm going to modify this model. This model is sitting there right now, and I haven't modified it since loading it in. I'm going to say ignore, and you'll notice that over here, associated with the model, is a little star that appeared. Okay. And if I did, for example, if I did undo here, well, before I ignored it, said ignore, there was no star, and then following saying ignore, there was a star. That star indicates the model has been modified since it's been saved. If you want to save a model following, for example, some modification, you can do so with a button up here. It says Save Model. Or you can press on your computers in the lab, Control S. On Macs, it is Command S. Okay. A clock is right twice a day. That's great. Command S, ladies and gentlemen. And sometimes, generally, it's useful to save early. Save often, okay? Because you want to be careful about going too long. If something happens, you may lose that model. So it's better to save it. AnyLogic does automatically save every few minutes. Just be aware. But often you want to save after a bit of a logical chunk of work. So you do a chunk of work and you save it and you run it and you see how things are going. So a few other elements of this about navigating the interface. In this, you'll notice that these tabs are a common theme across many of these different windows. For example, there's a search tab here and a properties tab. If we double click on a tab, it'll make it full screen. So if we just want to focus on that, we can do so by double-clicking. And by double-clicking on it again, it will put it back in its place. Okay? That allows us to zoom in. More commonly, you might double-click on this person tab. Okay? So double-click on it. Now I get a full-screen view of the model. On a screen such as that possessed by Wade in Yonder Lab, it's particularly impressive. He has a 43 or something inch screen, and it's particularly impressive to view and helpful to view in full screen mode. But by double clicking on it again, I can go back. So sometimes I'll go zoom in to portions of the model. I want to see maybe main with a little bit more breadth, and so I could just double click and then I can stop clicking again. Now, you'll notice that each of these tabs is moreover associated with a little X. Okay? That X marks a danger and an opportunity. It's a danger because if you click it inadvertently, for example, on the properties window, one of the most central ways of learning about the model, because the properties tell you about the things that are selected. If I were to click that, it's gone. Okay? Now, that is not a disaster, but for example, if I were to want to find out about things, it prevents me from seeing information about them. But fear not, if you go to the Views menu, there's a choice of the tabs that you'd like to view. I'm going to view, for example, Properties. And the Properties view will bring me back, ladies and gentlemen, to this tab. It'll restore that tab. So in short, if you get rid of one of these things, maybe you just want to clean up, you don't feel you need it right now, you can always go to the View menu and retrieve it. Alternatively, with the View menu, you could hide it and not have it. So the View menu provides you the option of seeing different tabs. And there's a wide variety we might want to see. One we'll be exploring is the console. This is going to provide us information as the model runs. Another one we might want to see is the palette, which is going to give us choices to build up a model here. Let us add things to a model of different types. Okay? So all of those are available through this view. There's some things that are more specialized, like GIS search results. When we search online in a GIS database for, cities called Melbourne, it will be shown in this GIS search window. The Problems window will make our acquaintance sooner or later. For many of you, probably sooner. And for me, probably sooner. A Problems window is your friend. It's like a good friend, ladies and gentlemen, who sometimes can tell you things you need to hear but don't want to hear. Okay? It can tell you basically it doesn't understand what you mean. And that can let you zero in on what the issue is and fix it in a jiffy. For the young people, that means fix it quick. For the older people, it's fix it lickety-split. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, the View menu also is your friend. A few other things, though, that are of note. You'll notice there's this search window. This is maybe the first boot camp that I've taught about using search. I use it almost every day when I interact with a model, but I just never thought to tell people about it, and it's my fault. So, AnyLogic has very powerful, useful search tools. So if we were to, for example, go to this model, this is a large model that we were interacting with this morning. If I wanted to find all things, for example, mentioning convenience store, okay, I could say convenience, and you notice it doesn't have to be case sensitive. I can choose whether I want to be case sensitive, and I can search, and I find, okay, there's a thing called convenience store. Within Maine, the agents are mentioning it here, including in the population. It factors into a graph here, a couple graphs. It's in collections, like the convenience store collection. It's used in a certain event, and it's referred to in several state charts for a person, for example, food procurement and preference for convenience store meals. In short, it's looking for this word in the model and showing me all the different places that this word appears within the model. And it shows them to me in a hierarchical fashion. So I can kind of explore, drill down, and see where those are. And if I want to go to one of them, like maybe I want to go to this food procurement state chart here, I can double click on it, and hey, come on. It should bring me to that, but Come on. Okay, fine. Oh, I have to expand it more. That's why. Expand it more, expand it more. Expand it to the lowest level where there's no little things to be expanded further. And I'll click on this entry action. There it brings me to that exact place, right there. It's showing me exactly where that word is. So, if you want to get to one of these things, you need to burrow down the list to the bottom level where there's no more little things to expand, no more expandos, and you can click and it will show you where those are within the model. Yes, oh, thank you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, on a PC, it's Control F. On a Mac, it is Command F.
I think it's Command F. 1 second.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, question.
Is it customary to have model builders use multiple extension monitors and pin up some of these components simultaneously?
It can be useful to have a large monitor. Wade could comment most authoritatively on that. Wade, would you say it's useful to have a large monitor to inspect models?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and what do you find most useful about it?
Being able to see, like in a large model, being able to see the whole, or at least most of the state charts or other components in one screen without scrolling pretty much across the page.
Now, multiple monitors, you can use, particularly when you've got the model and you're running the model. So if I were to take this model, for example, and I were to run it, remember what's showing here is the sort of depiction of model logic. And what it's saying, for example, is for each person, all these things apply. When I actually go and have a scenario and I want to run it, then it's going to create many specific agents, each of whom is going to be described by this logic, but they're going to each have their own weight, for example, each have their own location. So, and here we go. And so if I had these two windows, it's often nice to be able to separate them on a separate window. And you can inspect them separately. For those who are more interested in doing customization, I will note that, well, as you can see here, there's all sorts of options to sort of customize this interface. Amongst other things, I can drag these things round. I can split that screen, and they kind of stick in places. And by dragging, I can kind of reconfigure the interface to my liking. And that can be useful at times. At other times, it can be confusing. If I want to see more than one canvas at a time, I can do so by dragging down here, and then I could, for example, see 2 canvases. So all I'm doing is I'm sort of dragging these tabs around. Click and drag. And you notice I'm looking for when it shows these kind of bars, boom. And I can let go there, and it will sort of show me the appropriate reconfiguration. Sometimes there's a bit of a delay, but that's a pretty handy feature. So Control F, that's your friend. You want to use it early and you want to use it often. Now, let's suppose that we introduced a problem in this model, okay? Let's suppose that we were to do something untoward. Let's see. Suppose we were to go to main and we were to go try to place something illegal at a certain place. So I'm going to Homes and I'm going to put something nasty there. I'm going to put an exclamation point, okay? You notice it's saying, okay, there's a little X next to it, and if I click over the X, or I hover over the X, it will say, home exclamation point is not a valid Java identifier. Basically, it's telling me it's unhappy. That's one of its many ways of saying it's unhappy. And so I get rid of that little exclamation point, and now it's happy. So the little red X's is indicative of displeasure. It's its way of showing displeasure. Now, if it encounters acute displeasure, then it'll be shown in other ways yet, okay? So for example, I'm selecting homes here, and if I were to go and I were to put a double dot here, so self ... location, if I were to try to run this model, it's gonna engage in a computational version of a freakout. Well, okay, it's actually not this is not like super freak. This is just sort of moderate panic. So it's saying it's unhappy. If I went to try to run the model, it would encounter the same problem. So I put this extra dot, and what I did is I kind of cheated. I didn't cheat. I just went up there and I pressed build, which we'll be doing a lot. That's one of the most common things we'll be pressing. Alternatively, I could have put that extra dot and I could have said, hey, run me this model. And what the problem it's going to encounter is, it's almost like I've told it something ungrammatical. You know, I'm saying, eating, you know, I'm trying to find an English sentence that would be ambiguous. You know, eating green or something like that. It's not clear what I mean, right? What is Noam Chomsky's famous one? Furious green ideas. Or what is that? Furious green ideas sleep.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
Yeah. Okay. Now that's actually grammatically correct, but it's semantically meaningless. And then there are some things that are grammatically incorrect. You know, me want to eat or something like that. And in either of these cases, AnyLogic will tend to flag you the problem in what's called the problems window, okay? So that's where your problem children live, in this problems window, okay? Now, you'll notice that each of these things in the problems window is flagged with an X that marks that there's a problem. That's its indication there's a problem. And it tries to tell you what the problem is as best it can. Now, sometimes in the class of things that I termed super freak things, it's gonna throw you a whole ton of these things, which Cheryl may have encountered that before. But here it's showing me one. And if I double click on this, you notice it's actually trying to tell me the location. It tells me where it thinks the location is. And if I double click on this, it'll actually bring me to what it thinks the location is, which is this thing in homes here. So if I double click on this, it actually put me up here. I double click on that. Okay, it says homes. And okay, it's something to do with homes. And I have to spot in this case, okay, it says double dot. But it says syntax error on token dot. Delete this token. So I know it has something to do with a dot. And okay, there's a double dot. And I can then go see if I fixed it by using this build window up here. There's a thing called build. And now it's a happy camper. You'll notice down here, if I do build and it's happy, it thinks it understood what I mean. Then there's a message down here. It says build completed successfully. So it says, okay, I think I got what you mean. Now that doesn't guarantee that what I told it to do is what I wanted to do. I may have told it to do something that I really intended, but at least it thinks the communication is clear. It knows, it understands me loud and clear. Whether the model will be useful is another matter, but it says, okay, I know what you want me to do, that's fine. If, by contrast, there was an error, like if we had that double dot, it would it would show displeasure. So if I had done that build thing again, it will show this error, and it will say down here, 1 error. I can also click on this 1 error, and it will bring me to this problems window. This problems window commonly goes away if you don't need it, but it reappears to remind you of the issues with your model. Okay? So I'll just clean this up. I do build, and I know it's a happy camper. It tells me down here, build completed successfully. And that means I can run it. Building is getting it ready to run, and then I can actually go and run it. The truth is, in many cases, you may just want to run it, but I tend to build early and build often because I don't want to run it every time, but I want to check. Okay, a few other things here. Okay, one thing that's a very common trick that I commonly forget to tell people. I'm going to go collapse these things so I don't need to see them all the time and expanded in their fulsome glory. So I'm going to close those. What I'm going to do, though, is to show you a trick I use a lot. And that is, it relates to experiments. You may remember these X's in the blue indicate experiments. Those indicate scenarios I want it to run with certain assumptions. And it behooves you to name them in a way that communicates something about the intention behind them. For example, I have a baseline scenario, which is kind of a default scenario. I have a big population. I have a medium population, which is smaller. And you'll notice between those, we have the population size varying. Okay? So you'll see here that you'll see in this population size area, it actually highlights the ones that are different from default values in the model. So population size, I'm choosing 10, for example, which is different. Here it's 250. That's different from what's the default in the model, etc. So here, different scenarios can make different assumptions. If I want the baseline with walks, I'm turning physical activity on. Now, sometimes what I want to do is take a variant of one of these scenarios. I want to modify just one thing. For example, maybe I want a big population with fewer homes. Okay? So I'll take this big population. I want 250 size population. This one has 150 homes. Maybe I want only 50 homes. I want to have homes that are bigger families, more people live in a given home. So what I can do here, rather than defining a new scenario from the start, which I would do by saying right-clicking on the model and saying new experiment, rather than defining that, I will right-click on this, I'll say copy, and then I will right-click on the model as a whole and I'll say paste. And what that does is it creates a new scenario with all the characteristics of the scenario that I copied, and then I just have to tweak one thing. So I'm going to base this new scenario on that other one from which I copied it, and now I'm just going to change one thing. So I'm going to say big population, few homes. Okay, that's not a very good name, but I'll change it to 50 homes. Now we're talking. Hey, come on, get back there. 50 homes. Okay, so copy pasting scenarios is favorable for productivity. It avoids you having to redefine them from scratch, particularly in a model which has lots and lots of parameters. It's particularly advantageous to just copy and then change one thing rather than redefining them all from scratch. Okay, so that's copying parameters. Okay, now there's another thing too, which I can introduce you to, and that's a window called the console. The console here is one of the windows I can display. It kind of comes, like the build window, it kind of comes and goes as needed, but sometimes you want to have it with confidence. The console window tells you what's going on in the model, in as much as you've asked the model to report on itself. I don't actually know that this model has anything that's that requires the console. I'm not confident that it does, and so it may be that we won't see anything. Here it does. See, look at this. Look at that. Okay, looky that. So it's reporting on some information about what's going on in the model. It's saying, okay, the distance from home to the nearest park is this many meters. The physical activity energy flow is this. These are outputs from the model that I actually told it. I was probably building this model and wanted to reason through what was going on. And the console actually gives me a kind of a picture into what's going on in the model. It's not the only way we can do that, but it's one of the ways. So, ladies and gentlemen, here what we can do is we can, for example, if we want to know where is it logging this from, how is it outputting this, we could copy something from here that isn't really changing. These numbers change, but we can copy this. I'm just doing Control-C to copy. On Macs, it would be Command-C. Okay? And I'm going to do Control-F, or on Mac, Command-F. Okay? And I'm going to paste that in there. And I'm going to see whence that came. Where in the model was that actually appearing? And it's saying, okay, it's showing me at two places. It's this... Okay, this is actually the name of a parameter, so it's actually giving me all the places that occurs, and it's also doing this here in the food procurement state chart and the actions. Here it is. This is where it's printing out. It's calling this thing called trace-ln. That actually prints it in this console window. So when it reaches this point, it dumps that information into this window. We'll see how we can use this to our advantage. But suffice it to say, if you want to sort of provide yourself information, what's going on within a model, this is one of the key ways that you do it. We'll later see a way called logging, where we can tell AnyLogic to automatically record all sorts of things that are going on while the model's running automatically. We'll see that later. But this is one way with the console window that we could keep track of this, okay? Let's see. I think that's most of the essential things. Let's take a look at one or two more things. There's a help system in AnyLogic. Its help system is unspectacular, but provides a modicum of help. Okay? How do you access it? You access it characteristically through the help window and the help menu. And you can then say, choose AnyLogic help, or you could go to the example models. Example models is pretty useful. There's a lot of different models that you can open. Some of them lack health import. There's lots more on the commercial side, even the defense side. But there are some that have health significance. Even putting aside ones of like such as chocolate production, which have indirect only impacts on health. There's also things like basic health economics. I believe that this originated in this boot camp, now that I look at it. Agent-based population model. There's a quite nice trauma model, which this trauma center model. There's further a model, this chronic treatment indication dynamics, clinical process concepts, and a variety of others. So if you're interested in exploring some built-in models, that can be useful. Some of them, such as these SAR models, are similar to what we're building up, and in fact some originated in this boot camp and got incorporated into the mothership. Okay? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to just minimize that window. You'll notice when you minimize it, it appears over here, or it appears on the sidelines. This actually is saying basically there's a window here we can restore by clicking on it. There it will come back. If we want to get rid of the tab altogether, we can click on that, knowing that we can always get it back for most tabs over here. But AnyLogic Help is directly accessible via the Help and in this top item, AnyLogic Help. And you'll find here a set of information on AnyLogic. There's some more detailed information. For example, AnyLogic modeling with Java, including some Java basics for AnyLogic, code completion information, and what's called an API reference that provides very detailed information on the various components we'll be using. This provides a point of reference for exactly at a programming level how the different pieces work. But there's also some broader tutorials here and some guidance on, for example, how you use particular elements of a model, how you engage in running a model, etc. There's some reference guides for particular sub-pieces of the model, and some broader information in effect. So AnyLogic Help is useful. You can search for it here. So if we search for agent, for example, okay, well, it exhibited slight dysfunction. But here we'll find all sorts of particular things that mention agent. If I were to search for patient, for example, we'll find examples that might mention patients, for example. Okay. So that's AnyLogic Help. Those are most of the features of AnyLogic. I will note a couple things. One thing is that when you run a model and you want to stop it, you want to cease its operation, there's a couple ways to do it. One thing is the button here. You can close the window. The most reliable and quick way, in my experience, is in this console to use this stop button here. And that will terminate it lickety-split. There's also a similar button up here that would terminate it in a jiffy as well. So that's one feature that's useful. This is, by the way, the search feature, which we talked about. It's visible through a button. If you're in, some of these buttons up here are enabled and disabled based on context. If you're in the canvas, if you're viewing a model, for example, you can zoom in on the model to different levels or zoom out as you're seeing fit. And you can also browse to different areas of the model. You can actually set up different areas of the model that you want to zip to quite easily rather than having to scroll around. You can just go to them. There's some other elements up here that are further helpful. So one of them is there's a thing called the distribution picker or wizard, which allows you to specify probability distributions from which you want to draw a value. It's disabled except if you are editing something where you can use it, in which case it will be enabled. We'll see that at some point in the course of the boot camp. And there's some further options up here. For example, undo. Undo in AnyLogic is Control-Z with PCs and Command-Z. Okay, Command-Z with a Mac. Okay, those are most of the. Oh yes, there's a couple things when running a model. When we specifically run a model, now this is a bit different for AnyLogic 8.3.2 and 8.1. So this is actually a bit of a difference. With 8.3.2, there's a little thing in the lower right that allows you to summon a tab. It'll sort of create a little tab, and you can have some of these controls there. In 8.1, there's some controls at the top here. What these controls allow you to do is to speed up the model, or in fact put it at full speed. You go full tilt with it. And in general, many times you don't care about watching the details of the machinations and you want to go full tilt. By contrast, maybe your interest is in actually browsing things in more detail. For example, I can use this item here. This allows me choice to see more controls, and I can say view. I want to display a view control, which allows me to zoom in. And now I'll do right click here, and what I can actually do is slow it down, and I might, oh no, I don't want to shrink it. I want to slow it down. I want to go back to speed 1 and maybe slow it down further. And I can actually see the agents meandering along the winding path of the Yarra, for example, river in Melbourne, or visiting near Flagstaff Park. So here you can actually see the agents move in a finer grained way as they make their way on their excursions to buy Tim Tams and meat pies. Okay, so here there's actually more fine-grained time you can watch if you wish to see them engage in, very detailed movement. This one is going along this thoroughfare. And so you can actually slow time down. But many times we just want to run it as fast as possible. We're not interested in the simulation. One very useful thing to do when you're running a model is to, for example, we could pause the model, and you can actually advance the model by a defined amount, okay? There's this thing called step, which will actually take it to the very next thing to do here. Alternatively, we can pull down this little menu next to this, and we could tell it, for example, run it for one time unit, which in this case is a day, and we'll see how to see that later. I could say run for. Right now it's day 330.38, so it's late morning in the fair city of Melbourne, and I could click this run for one time step. It's going to run it out, and there it is the next day in Melbourne. Time is advanced one time unit. Once I've done that, I can further go and keep on pressing that to go forward one time unit at a time. Okay, so that's enabled through this menu. It's very useful. Another thing you can do is run until. This is going to run the model until a specified time. So maybe I want to run it till time 350, for example. My students should pay attention to this. I'm not sure all of them are acquainted with these features of AnyLogic. Run until, okay? And then it will run the model until that time. And I can then go in and inspect what's going on, perhaps. I can undertake a change. And I could generally engage in sort of model browsing. Another thing I'll just note is we will learn how to explore a model as it's running in greater detail. For example, if we go to the population here, you'll find if you click on it that it will tell you certain information about the people in that population. It'll tell you the size, the number of agents in that population. And you can actually see information here on the model assumptions such as the population size and the count of homes operating. At the level of an individual, the same principles apply. So if we were to drill down to the population, we'd see, okay, we can see the status of the population of this person, but we can do more than that. We could actually change things at either the high level or the low level. For example, this individual is heavier, and we could, for example, perform bariatric surgery or something equivalent. We could go edit it, and we could change their weight to just 40 kilograms. We've reduced their weight by approximately a factor of 2, and we could run them forward, for example, from that point. And we will see in this case the effects are significant, but they end up regaining their weight because they enjoy the same propensity for Tim Tams and live a certain distance from parks and grocery stores, etc. These models are modifiable. We will explore ways that we can interact with them whilst running them. But some models are set up so when you, for example, click on it, I can go add supermarkets. This is all part of the model logic. And I can interact with it at runtime, which effects some intervention. So I'm double clicking here on the map in a way that allows me to place new resources. This logic is captured in the model in a very small bit of code, which allows me to undertake experiments, as it were, live. At a certain time, I could introduce a change and see how it affects things. So that's a little bit about interacting with models at runtime. I had introduced this navigation before. We could have used that more extensively, but in this case, it's not as interesting. In later cases, we might browse down to particular clinics or particular subpopulations. So that's a little bit about how you interact with a model whilst it's running within the broader context of AnyLogic's interface. Once again, we can repair to AnyLogic itself, leave this running window, go back to AnyLogic, and terminate it by pressing stop running, the big red button. Okay? A brief glimpse of the AnyLogic interface in which we will be living and hopefully breathing the next few days. Unless you've lost your breath through its beauty. Yes, Wade.
I just wanted to mention about the health. It's all on the internet too. And you may find using Google to search, especially if you're looking for something specific, is better than the help window. So you can just type AnyLogic and then your search terms into Google, and you'll find the AnyLogic help page among them.
Thank you, Wade. That's very helpful. And sometimes videos will show up too. Yeah, that might be useful. Yeah. Yes.
How do you do version control in this?
Very good question. That's something which I was planning to cover on Friday, but I'll make some remarks. Okay. So AnyLogic provides some links for people who are working with external systems. One of the most useful links for people to know about is to be able to actually describe a model, and I typically forget exactly where this is, but it's under Tools. There's a Create Documentation feature, which will help you document a model, and it can do so in a flexible, customizable fashion. So if you do create model documentation, you can, for example, ask that the model documentation be exported as a Word document or as a PDF or indeed as a web page. But more than that, you can tell it what information you want it to include in said documentation. Okay? This is an example of how AnyLogic can interface with some external tools here, providing things to Word. But another way has to do with a best practice we will be talking about on Friday, which has to do with maintaining successive versions of the model that are documented as to their purpose, as to what they've changed, and associated with output that are specific to that model version. We do so for several reasons. One of the most critical is when we output things from the model, it's important we know what version the model was used to produce them in case we want to reproduce them, generate them again. And there's two ways that one could engage, and it's very useful as you advance a model to be explicit about what are the different versions of the model. So you might have a version 1, a version 2, where you've added a few things, a version 3, and each of them might give somewhat different output from one another. And because of that, it's good to be clear about this output came from this version. We can maintain those versions in an informal way by simply saving it with a label that says version, but we can also engage in version control systems. And unfortunately, AnyLogic's support for modern version control is what I'd call mediocre. It's not non-existent, but it's mediocre. We can use a system called SVN, which is a version control system which enjoyed high popularity 10 years ago and 15 years ago, but has since been eclipsed by successively a system called Subversion, and then Git is the preferred tool of choice. But with Subversion, you can do model checkouts, commits, updates, etc. You also can use, and Wade, for example, is a prolific user of Git with AnyLogic, where you create a new model version, you commit it to a repository with Git from the command line, or with Tortoise Git or what have you, and then you have a repository which is stored successively and documented different versions of the model. So you don't have to name it version 1, version 2. It's just stored to the Git repository with that name. And you can store other artifacts like a database version together with the model, and if you wish, output for the model together with that model. So you can store these models in what's called a version control system, and that offers a variety of advantages in terms of not cluttering your space with many versions, in terms of keeping other things with them, and in terms of doing easy comparisons between them, having it be self-documenting in terms of when you commit it, you specify what's changed in this version, etc. So you can and you're encouraged to do version control with these. Okay. Be aware, behind the scenes, these models are encoded as text. In other words, it's what's called XML description, if that means something to someone. And an important implication is that you can actually look at the model description and compare it to another one with tools, and you can see what's changed between them to a degree. And if people are interested, be glad to show that at some point. But it is text, and it can be compared in contrast to something like a PPT document, which is binary and it's hard to compare. This you actually can compare, and you could see, oh, someone added a new parameter value or what have you. Okay? Okay, other questions? I know I showed you a lot. Okay, thank you. I am going to stop that